to technology.
Aha.
There you go.
And by cursed, I mean just
that?
monumentally stupid. But, I like cursed better. So you guys got me now? Can you see me?
Yes.
Yes.
God. For now.
We got you.
There seems to be a bit of a lag between your video and your audio, so you're coming across like a badly dubbed Godzilla movie. But I think that just adds the ambience.
I'll take it. I'll take it. Every time I'm like, can everybody hear me? Everybody's like, yeah. And Scott's like, well, actually.
Yeah.
Scott.
It's when you say something really shocking and then we're going to see it a few seconds behind. That's when the fun's going to be.
Yes.
It's going to be, what? Yeah. Oh, yeah, there you
go. Thank you all for attending, even from the con within the con. Jacqueline, thank you very much. And yeah, welcome to Horror Inspiration from Film and Media, our third panel in the inaugural Illusion Horror Con 2022. And yeah, I thank very much our guests and also our players and GMs who make this possible. And yeah, I'm very honored to have you all with us tonight again. Most of you have been in different panels before. So I'm very excited to speak a bit about horror inspiration of film and media and what that means for you. But before that, I would love to hear if you could just give a short introduction about yourself. And I'm just going to go around. Jacqueline, if you might want to start.
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Jacqueline Bryk, otherwise known as Jax Romana. My pronouns are she, her, they, them, and fey, femme, but only on special occasions. I am the English language editor for Cult Divinity Lost. I am also currently in the process of developing a book about playing kids in cults, which I'm very excited about. I've also worked with Onyx Path Publishing, White Wolf Entertainment, Paradox Side, Ulysses Spelay, Helmgast AB, obviously Genesis of Legend, and I worked on a Magic the Gathering set once. I am an award-winning writer, editor, designer, basically anything having to do with games that isn't art or marketing. I play around in game space, and I really enjoy doing it.
Wonderful. Next we have Jason Fryer.
Oh, hi, I'm Jason Fryer, writer, game designer, and general curmudgeon. I've been writing for Cult since 1995, when I started with second edition. I've also been writing other games for Through the Breach, AMP, Ninja Crusade, and The Strange, so, usually focusing on horror or aspects thereof. And horror's basically been my life from the very beginning, so glad to be here.
Wonderful. And then we have Newman.
Hello, I am the host and creative director of the Miskatonic Playhouse. We're relatively new on the scene, but we've made a bit of a splash. We are kind of a hub, a huge community hub. I am a writer as well, along with the other members, the other kind of core staff members of the Miskatonic Playhouse. And we produce lots of content. What we try and do is go to community content for Call of Cthulhu, and we say, right, you've made these amazing things. Let's show it to the rest of the community. We're also very big on doing interviews with people within the community. We're very big on getting people and saying, hey, we all know your name, but let's come and talk and have a chat and things. So people on the panel expect nudges in the near future because, just that kind of annoying person. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, our big thing at the minute is that we've released, we've got a long form Cthulhu Regency story going, which is really, really good. And we are just absolutely thriving and loving on it and learning a lot as we're doing it as well. So yeah. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. And then we have Scott Dorward from the neighboring
yes.
Elias.
Thank you. Yes. I'm Scott. I do a bit of writing and editing for various RPGs, mainly Call of Cthulhu, but a few other largely horror games. But these days I spend most of my time podcasting, mainly with the good friends of Jackson Elias. But I do a lot of actual play stuff as well with How We Roll, Ain't Slayed Nobody, and Grizzly Peaks Radio.
Cool. And lastly, we have Seth Skorkowsky, who is probably better with all of that YouTube streaming than we are in our first year.
Yeah, but you notice I'm the one with the technical difficulties. So I have Seth Skorkowsky. I do a YouTube channel just about RPGs, various reviews or how-tos. A lot of coverage for Call of Cthulhu. I think my most recent one I did was for some cult. I'm a novelist, so I've got several books I've written and done some updates for adventures for various systems. I also do the Modern Mythos podcast, and that's pretty much me.
Wonderful. And yeah, thank you again for agreeing to join this fantastic panel, because I think it's a great mix of content creators from different fields that kind of unite in the idea that I think a lot of us who do and create content or run scenarios or games in the horror realm, and that is how do you get and where do you get your inspiration for scenarios? And to kind of start off the general discussion, I would kind of like to ask, because I think that's also one of the things that we get asked frequently. What is your best piece of horror art, which can include RPG systems, scenarios, books, film, movies, that you kind of find is very inspiring to you, even after several years or maybe several read-throughs? And especially, why is it so important to you? Yeah, Jacqueline, please.
So I brought this up a lot in my panel about safety with Seth last night, but my favorite piece of horror art that I find super inspiring and really good as a starting point is Bluebeard's Bride by Magpie Games, because it is such an emotional game that has a lot of different layers, but what it is actually a haunted house game about imbalances of power. And it always reminds me that adding a metaphor into your game, especially a horror game about difficult subjects, makes your game so much more accessible to a wider audience. Like, Bluebird's Bride is very much about what it is about, and it's very clear with its themes. But its themes are presented through ghosts and hungry furniture and fireplaces that want to devour you and skeletons that show up out of nowhere and pictures that seem to follow you with their eyes. And it is a wonderful, visceral, super open piece of horror that I think any horror author should look at when they are building their first horror game. My other suggestion is, oddly, Heroes of Horror for D&D. That's actually how I got into writing horror. It's very 101 because it's written for D&D 3.5 storytellers, and it's their first foray into horror. It's written for someone whose first foray into horror is this book. So it's very, here are the building blocks of tension. Here are themes that you want to use in horror. Here are ways to make things horrific. And, like, it's not perfect, but I try to go back to it at least once a year.
Okay, wonderful. Good suggestions. Thank you. Anybody else have something that pops to mind? Seth, I see your mind racing here.
I'm trying to articulate. So, but I was trying to think of like certain movies that have impacted me greatly, and I can revisit. And over time, the parts that I appreciate sort of evolve and grow and change. And I would say the original Alien, Ridley Scott, because you have a gothic style spaceship. So we've got a almost haunted house sort of thing. But over the years, all of a sudden you start seeing all the themes of sex, of rape, of the body horror and things. So as the years progressed, from when I'm 12 till now, the parts that I appreciate about that grow and change with me. So I would say Alien is probably one that I can always go back to and find something new that I really do appreciate about it.
Wonderful. Scott, Jason, Newman, what is your...
Yeah. The one that I keep going back to was one of my biggest influences when I was young, which is a TV series that almost no one remembers, sadly, which was a British TV series from 1976 called Beasts, which was written by Nigel Neal, who's better known for the Quatermass films. And Beasts was a phenomenal bit of television. It was 6 self-contained stories, like little television plays, all of which were horror stories that revolved in some degree around animals. And there was one story in particular called Baby, which involved a couple from the city moving out to the countryside and renovating this old cottage and finding this mummified something in the walls of their house. And it really established a lot of my preferences in terms of horror, in that it's sort of classic folk horror, but it's also very emotionally driven, very creepy, and has a real gut punch at the end. And yeah, I just keep going back to that one. I keep realizing how often I sort of reinvent a lot of the elements from there. It's on YouTube. I highly recommend searching for it. And I think it's aged fairly well, but certainly watching it, at the age of 11 back in '76, it scared the shit out of me.
I do actually remember you. Didn't you post like a Twitter or something about the sheeps, the kind of sheeps in a barn a while ago? I must have been a couple of months back, but I think it might have been something that was related to that. But Jacqueline, sorry to interrupt.
No, it's okay. I know about Beasts from Mark Fisher's book, The Weird and the Eerie, because he talks about Quatermass and Beasts in that compilation, and that's really cool to see that you also know of it, though you know a bit more firsthand than I do.
It's in the notes, Scott. I've written it down. You know me. I'm making notes. You know what I'm like. I can offer a much more, or rather, much less refined and like kind of epiphany moment. So in my childhood, I remember my brother just basically my older brother just basically going, "We're going to watch this. We're going to watch this. We're going to watch this." I was way too young. But that's just classic kind of like 80s, 90s kind of kid, wasn't it? Yeah, we got these VHSs. Let's watch this. I'll name a few, but there's one or two that really refined, I think, my storytelling and likes in terms of narrative. Tremors. Come on, the big love for the dolls. I think one of the ones that I remember saying to my mum after watching it with my brother and kind of going, "This was amazing, watch it with me." And my mum loved it, but went, "You should not be watching this," was Event Horizon. Because I was definitely nowhere near old enough, and I was going, "Sam Neill's amazing, Lawrence Fishburne's amazing," and my mum was like, "You shouldn't be watching this." There was one that was really cheesy, and I remember it blowing my mind, and I think it was because of the kind of like the series of revelations in the film, and I'm going to say it, and you'll probably shake your heads. Do you remember Dark City?
Oh yeah.
Yes. Oh yeah.
With Rufus Sewell. And it was and
Richard O'Brien.
Yes, Richard O'Brien, and they had the weird they were like the men in the black suits following them, and there was just a series of revelations. So I felt when I watched it, it was the classic I'm finding things out when I'm supposed to, and it was really rewarding. It was really great fun. But I think the thing that really again was a bit beyond my time, but going back and really digging into it, I loved it. And there's one scene that always sticks in my mind was the Tales of the Crypt. And it was, do you remember the one with the specifics of it. It's the one where there's the wife, she's having an affair. They bury their husband on the beach up to his neck. And the next day he kind of, there's crabs crawling on him.
That was from Creepshow, wasn't it?
Creepshow, sorry, Creepshow.
Yes.
Thank you, Scott. And then he comes back like the next night, doesn't he? And he's like the seaweed horrible monster. I think those things left such an imprint on visuals as well as those narrative beats. That I think that's what it was for me.
That visual is also very heavily used in the Salt versus podcast.
Perfect. Yeah, there you go. Well, I think it's going to be. I think so many people are going to have seen that and just gone, "That is what I'm going to try and deliver to my players."
Oh yes.
See, way back and it's always, I mean, it still haunts me to this day, and I can thank the BBC for this. It was Space 1999, Dragon's Domain. I mean, right now it looks horrible. I mean, the special effects are just terrible. But basically, this creature could hypnotize you, and you would literally just walk into its mouth, and then it would just spit out the bones. And that image of just being completely helpless and aware as you're being consumed kind of struck a chord in a 6-year-old child. So, but recently, the one I constantly go back to is Session 9. Uh, it's a movie that basically takes place in a old insane asylum, where these gentlemen are trying to basically clean the asbestos out, and voices start playing in their heads, and various things start to happen. And I won't ruin anything, but just the slow burn and tension just ramping up, and the isolation and all the interchange between the characters. I mean, that thing will live with you. The last lines of that movie still haunt me to this day. So,
Is it a newer film, Jason, or is it an older one?
I think it's about 10 years old.
Oh,
Okay.
I think it was late 90s. Yeah, I think so.
We'll check that out.
Yeah, it was shot on location in the abandoned Danvers Asylum in Massachusetts, which
Gorgeous asylum.
is also the location of the Call of Cthulhu scenario Genius Loci.
Yep.
Ah,
2001. Yep, you're right.
Okay, cool. Thank you. What a good recommendation.
okay. Well, great suggestions here. Now, what a couple of people were asking, or what I think a lot of us GMs are also kind of deliberating when it comes to inspiration coming from film and media. What is your general tip, or what is your tool that you utilize in order to kind of keep notes, keep track of whatever you kind of collect throughout watching television shows, listening to radio shows or something? Is there something specific, or do you have a special organization tool that you might want to share, or that brought you pretty good results when it comes to then later on using these materials back into writing a scenario, for example?
Oh, babe, I have ADHD. I don't have a tool. I'm just like, this thing made me feel away. Let me go ahead and throw that in there. I'm going to put a pin in that because I want to let other people talk, but I would actually like to talk about a real life inspiration in this specific question after everyone else finished talking about their actual organization systems.
I'm the same. Maybe it's ADHD or whatnot, but I don't really write down or keep track of the parts of different films or shows or books that inspire me. But a lot of it comes down to what is it that sticks with me, like what scene or what thing. Because a lot of the things that I'll find inspiring are really banal. Yeah, it might be the shot of them walking down a hallway, or something very subtle. It doesn't have to be a massive plot point, or the thing when you're trying to do an image grab, you're never going to have an image of the part that always stuck with me that I really want to emulate. So it's nothing that I really organize. It's just when I remember the film, what is it that I remember first, or what is the parts that I keep really gripping onto, of like, that's what I want, but I can't even articulate it because it's so subtle, or so small, I guess, by the full film or show's standards.
When I hear that, I immediately the one thing kind of based on that is the Shining and the tricycle scene down the hallways. Like, this is like such a perfect scenery that like immediately also stuck in my head. Like, it's just this kid on the tricycle riding down the hallways, but it's so much more to it. It's this ambience, the feeling, this background music that slowly builds up everything, and I'm like, wow, that is in a sense horror, because it's building up to suspense, and like, is something happening when it turns? Now? Maybe next turn? And yeah, I think just to give a bit of my sense here, I think that was something that in my case was like something very gripping, and a lot of the scenery and imagery from The Shining and Kubrick's version of it was kind of really impressive, and I think I use a lot of it even nowadays still.
There's a scene I use from The Shining when I'm teaching about, and we were talking about this last night, about dramatic tension, suspense, and it's because I'm teaching, students that about up to 18 years old. You can't really show too much of The Shining, but it's when Shelley Duvall is literally looking through the book, the All Work and No Play. And it's just and there's about a 4-minute build, and then the final thing is Jack Torrance kind of just coming around the corner, and all he says is, "What do you think?" But that 4-minute build, when you show it to those students and they're watching it, and there's nothing else that happens because of the music, the location, everything you're saying, just beautiful, beautiful storytelling.
So coming back to tools, Jason, Scott. I do remember, Scott, you saying you have a little black book that you carry around and take notes in every time you...
Yeah. Yeah, I because I've got a terrible memory, I rely an awful lot on taking notes, and I keep notebooks, and I keep various tools on the computer just for jotting down notes as well. I've got notes scattered across about a half dozen different places, which is not by design. It's just because my brain doesn't work properly. But But the thing is, I very rarely make specific notes when reading books or watching films or anything like that. I tend to take the approach that I consume a lot of horror across all sorts of media, and I sort of let it soak into me. I enjoy it for what it is. If I'm recording a podcast episode about it, I'll analyze it to some extent, but otherwise I generally don't analyze it too much. And I rely much more on trying to perhaps recapture the feelings or the way something landed with me during a film, rather than thinking, oh, I like that scene or that story element or that character, I'm going to use that specifically. I'll sometimes perhaps create a bit of an analog for a character, but mostly no, it's just relying on planting all those seeds in my brain and just seeing what twisted things grow up out of them.
Yeah, I have notebooks pretty much on every square inch of my room, in my house, in my car, just to jot down whatever stray thought comes to mind. What's strange of late, I've become more clinical with watching and consuming horror media, because I just keep on finding myself watching, oh, that's what they're doing right now. That's what, that's going to lead into this. So I really enjoy it when I'm actually surprised and somebody twists the narrative, or
yes.
So and unfortunately, it ruins quite a few movies for me, because I can actually see, oh, that's going to happen. Yeah, that's going to happen. So
it should have been written like this.
Yeah, it should have been written like this. Exactly.
Newman, do you have?
Only only in a tiny way. I don't make notes watching films or anything, and I think, but I think sometimes, even when you're watching a film or a series, sometimes as Jason's saying, you could watch something and it's a bit so-so, and it's a bit mainstream, and perhaps we're looking for something a bit higher brow because we appreciate the genre so much, possibly, but sometimes there's just like a character that you can just, in the whole thing, the thing might be okay-ish, might be that, but sometimes there's a character that you're just like, wow, whether it's the performance, whether it's the dialogue, whatever it is, but sometimes that is a lovely thing to leach out, and I don't know, can be the starting point for a whole scenario, I guess, depending on what the kind of character is.
Yeah, I will say, because I'm also like Scott in the fact of the haphazard collection of, mine's Post-it notes. I have an addiction to Post-it notes, and I'll drive on the top one, and that means that Post-it pad is completely off limits until I use whatever's on the top one. So I now just have 10 million Post-it pads because I never get around to using it, but they only have the top page used. My issue. But Well, not with film. I do when I'm writing. Will write down certain things that inspire me. When I did a horror novel that was set in New Orleans, it was because I'd gone to New Orleans and I came home with a pad that had the weirdest stuff written in it that all ended up in there, such as old glitter between cobblestones. Of little things that I saw while walking down the street, and all of them made it into the book just to add that realism because I couldn't on a whim go back and walk down that same street and get the same impressions, but I can always just pop on the TV and watch it again. So when I make the notes is when I have to remember this because that I'm not going to get this again. Versus, I can just pop on Netflix again and watch whatever. So that is when I will make notes. Sometimes on a pad I'll find a year later and wonder what in the hell this random string of words and phrases is. But that is one method that I do use as a tool.
Um,
And
Yeah.
yeah, and keep your notes. Always keep your notes. I mean, the atrocity exhibition, which I wrote recently, it was actually an idea that was 20 years in the making. Just a note about an image that had come into my mind in the Gutenberg Museum of a whole bunch of body parts raining down on on the patrons, and that turned into the cult module, the atrocity exhibition, 20 years later. So keep your notes.
um, Jacqueline, you mentioned earlier that you had a follow-up on that with a personal story, which we definitely would like to hear.
Yeah. So, I think my favorite adventure I've written for Cult, and definitely one that gets a lot of publicity, is And the Rocket's Red Glare, which is about the Trump election. And I wrote that not based off of any fictional anything, but because of the grief I was feeling after that election, because I actually grew up Republican, but like many people who go to college, I swung left and pretty hard. And that was my first election where seeing the Republican win was hard for me. And like, I was not doing well. I was in the middle of writing another scenario for Cult, and I went to Petter and I was like, I need to write this other thing. Can I write this other thing, please? And I think I wound up writing it in like 96 hours just because of that feeling that I was having, and I just needed to like splash it onto the page. And it's still one of like my favorite things I've written for Cult, and it's also I think one of the best Red Moon role playing scenarios that they have on their channel, just as a one shot. So like sometimes you just get amused, and it's very rare for me. I have to like practice writing, otherwise I'm like I can't wait for amused. But sometimes you'll just get the muse and you just got to put it down on the paper and remember that the perfect is the enemy of the good and the done.
Wonderful. That's actually a perfect transition to another topic that was also asked quite often since published authors, and you have quite a few scenarios out there. Writing the scenario is one thing, getting the inspiration, but sometimes you reach that thing where it's just like I just stare at the screen and I type and there's nothing coming out. And I have complete writer's block. I have no, like, even if I go through my notes, I can't do anything. Like, you lost kind of your muse there. And what would you say is your muse, or what is that thing that kind of maybe gives you your inspiration back? And, or maybe to that extent, is there any tool that you can suggest to overcome that writer's block? I mean, there are multiple suggestions, and obviously that's personal experience, but maybe for the one or the other listener here, that might work.
One of the tricks I do if I'm suffering, if I hit a block, if I'm working on something, whether it be a story or a scenario or a video that I'm working on, is I will end up working on something else for a bit. My entire Black Raven series should have just been called Stuff I Did During Writer's Block on Another Novel, where there would just be like these short little sword sorcery adventures. Then I could go back to my novel. Or so there is a switch gears, work on another thing for a little bit until you're like get the muse back.
would it be fair to say it's still within the creative realm, or do you try to find kind of a switch somewhere outside of that, like go on a walk or do something in the yard? I don't know. Was it still within the creative?
There is go for a walk, change your scenery. That is a very popular one. But one of the things I will do to stay productive is I can, even if I'm not feeling the whatever I need to write, whatever I'm working on, I could always find something else that can inspire me for a bit until that grabs me again. I can go back to the main project. So that is one of the methods I'll do, is even if it's just jotting down ideas for the next project or some other thing that's in the back of your head. And then when you get around to it, you got a ton of stuff you already started. So
anybody else want to give their suggestions?
I don't necessarily get classic writer's block. I do very often lose interest in things and really struggle with motivation, but that's a bit different. But I think one of the reasons I don't tend to get classic writer's block is because my development method for scenarios particularly is quite different from most people's, in that I develop them through playing. I don't sit down and write something first. I'll have an idea. I may have like a half dozen bullet points or maybe a loose relationship map or something like that. And my development process is that I will run a scenario like 5 or 6 times. And each time I do so, I'll improvise heavily, take things in different directions, see what the players do. And what's left at the end of that is a whole bunch of ideas that will go into the scenario. And that means that by the time I come to actually writing the scenario, it's actually just a fairly mechanical thing. All I'm doing is transcribing stuff that has already been made up. So there isn't the classic writer's block thing of, I can't think where this is going to go, or any blocks to imagination. And I mean, for me, that is simply because the process of playing, that process of improvisation, kind of puts me on the spot for creating stuff. And so there's no time to get blocked. There's no time to get scared of stuff. There's no time to, you have to think of something right then because you've got a bunch of players looking at you. And so, as a result, I don't think I've ever really had classic writer's block with the scenario.
I think the wiser minds here have kind of tipped on the top points here, but I similarly, perhaps not in the same way as Scott, although I think I'd actually really like to try it. I think it's a really bloody good idea. I probably get too carried away on my own coming up with the initial concept and getting so much down first and getting so excited. When you don't tell anybody about your idea and it's your private little thing and it just bundles around for so long. I just love that. Keep it secret for as long as possible. But I think when I have been writing scenarios and I have been in a place where I've gone, okay, I'm kind of losing a bit of acceleration with this, jumping onto another idea like Seth was saying, absolutely, is definitely I don't know, it's like a different flavor for a while, isn't it? And then you kind of go, oh yeah, I kind of this idea I've just had doesn't really work for this, but it would work for that. So there is a bit of a back and two. But similarly, with Scott, luckily I've got some good pals that I can kind of say, hey, we're gonna do this, let's just do it. Just do it. Don't ask any questions. Let's just do it. And you can kind of run through some things. And unfortunately, some of those things that you thought were the best ideas in the world aren't. And yet then a solution is provided to you and you go, oh, yeah, okay. And that can actually leap because it takes you in a different direction with the material that you were working with. You then see it through a different lens. I think would be my contribution.
I always use music
No.
in the background to basically, because I react to the narrative beats and try to go to the music as well. And this is going to sound horrible, but when I'm really stuck on something, I watch a really crappy horror movie because the rage that produces sometimes basically fuels me to be able to write. So, I can do as good, if not better than that. Just get out of your own way and shut up.
I actually have to second, like, wholeheartedly this, because that's exactly what I do. Music is one of the greatest inspiration that I use for kind of outlining, designing, because I kind of go more by, I know what the plot roughly should be. Like, A should go to B, C happened, and they're trying to figure out that D and E are involved in creating C. But if I listen to music or just put on some ambient music that slightly changes or creates the mood, I feel like immediately my mind starts racing from all the inspiration that I had from movies, books, literature, and everything. And suddenly, like, it just clicks, and I just make notes. And I think I combined a lot of different aspects here because I listened to a lot of your guys' experience from different sources. And then start just running a game by using a minimalistic amount of notes and using the background music throughout the gameplay allows me to kind of continue that that narrative that I see in my head, that kind of the movie that kind of continuously goes along. And I think that's a very fun aspect in kind of creating designs and utilizing kind of media as we as all of us as horror writers, creators are do, because watching B horror movies was probably one of the best things or the most efficient things I did during writing my PhD thesis, because it was the best distraction just watching a crappy B movie. And I think I've almost exploited the whole list of B movies on Amazon Prime back then while I was in the US, but it was ridiculous to realize that aspect is exactly how Jason said. When you see kind of there are B movies that have great plot, great basic, and I think that's also where one needs to distinguish. B movies or crappy horror movies can be crappy because of visual effects are not as good, or they don't have the production value. But the scenery, the imagery, the content, the story itself might be. I have seen great horror movies, especially on the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival, I think in 2022, a collection of short films. My wife actually gave me tickets for that for when it became online, and so I was happy to kind of just watch it on the porch. And I was watching these short films, and yeah, obviously they had a budget from $500 or something, but they utilized different aspects of different movies or their inspiration. And it was so impressive to see how little you actually need to create an atmosphere, to create a storyline. And that doesn't need to be like super CGI effects or special effects. I feel like it is the worst. I've seen really bad horror B movies that created the best inspiration for some of scenarios that I've written because their plotline was flawless. They just didn't have the money to kind of create the content compared to, Netflix production nowadays that are just, your mind is blown by, you don't know what to look at because everything is just like shiny and flashy and sprinkly, I feel like.
Well, I find that a lot of the movies with a smaller production value can actually be some of the best because they can't show the monster, but they still have to invoke fear.
Yeah.
And we were talking about this last night. Moorhead and Benson and Moorhead, who have done Resolution and The Endless, they don't really, you rarely see the monster, but you are just terrified because you know it's there and you know what it can do. But they have a very small budget, so they can't show that. So they had to find narrative ways to inspire fear without going for the throat, so to speak.
I know it's a different conversation. Oh, sorry, Scott, go on.
No, sorry, Newman, please.
Just a massive tangent. Sorry, everyone. Just Jason, I think you're so right in what you're saying, but I think also in terms of a contemporary audience, we are so good at looking at CGI now and going, is it any good? And if it's not, it's such a pull. It's such a bloody rug off the under the table, off the table, whatever the metaphor is, and we can tell. Whereas with those, what I would call old school visceral literal effects, there's no hiding that because it is what it is. I just think that that's something that I think a contemporary audience we have evolved as an audience to recognize what good CGI is, and if it's not there, it can impact the narrative. As David's saying, it doesn't If it doesn't have the budget, they play with that and make it work. If it does have the budget, but if it's not quite right, contemporary audiences can be brutal in going, no, that didn't quite pull it off. Sorry, Scott.
I mean,
No, no. All I was going to say is I don't think you even need special effects at all to make a creepy horror film. I mean, they can certainly help, but I was thinking that one of the creepiest films I've seen in the last 10 years was a Scottish horror film from 2014 called The House of Him, which was done on zero budget. I mean, like almost literally zero budget. It's all just shot in someone's house. There's no special effects. And it is really sinister and creepy. I mean, the people who made it are all professionals. They're comedians rather than people who'd worked in horror before. But yeah, it's a fantastic little film. I think a great example of how much you can do with nothing.
I mean, that was one of the things that I've been in discussions about the original Hellraiser and the recent Hellraiser. The recent Hellraiser is still a good movie, but as saying, the CGI takes away from the grittiness, the ugliness that was in the original. It seems too clean, almost sterile. And once you take away, and one thing that Clive Barker never was sterile. He's very visceral and bloody.
You need a little bit of that jankiness.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people forget the lightning effect at the end of that movie where Clive Barker admitted it was last second and they were drunk editing at night, drawing lightning bolts on it. You can tell. But
Yeah.
I feel that like even with low budget, even with low effects, one that I always recommend as just a fantastic horror movie that's done in the 70s style, but it wasn't made in the 70s, is The Skeleton Key. And I don't know if there's even special effects in that movie. It's a tiny cast, it's very mood oriented, wonderful film, but there's not a big scary monster or anything. And any special effects they do are very, very, very subtle. But something a little bit more recently, also done in the 70s style by sheer chance, is X, which came out earlier this year. And really practical effects, I think, is all that they used for their gore. And that was, it hit the nail on the head as far as what it was going for. So we don't always have to have the big effects. There's something like Hellraiser you do, because it's very otherworldly, and that is part of the shock value. But I think that if even with low budget films they could do it. They brought up with a Smile, which recently came out. I would think I watched that yesterday. It was based off of like a 12-minute film that they had made. And Saw, same thing. If you watch the original, two-person movie, and then they got greenlit for the whole thing, it still captured everything that they wanted to do in the full-length movie in that brief little window. We've got a camera and $500. Let's do this. So I think that spirit, that essence of the film, really can be compressed down that small, and that's usually the part that we steal.
Just to go back to how do you break out of writer's block? I have two suggestions, and there were a lot of really good suggestions, like music and improv. I tend to use music a lot. One of the things I'll also do is like make an outline for myself and fill it in methodically, because then it feels like less of a huge project. I learned from other authors that like writing 200 words a day until your project is done, if you have enough time to do that, is a great way to never get writer's block and never really like feel that crunch. But there's really good advice from, of all things, a Studio Ghibli movie about writer's block. If y'all have seen Kiki's Delivery Service, take some time. Don't think about it. Go sleep in and go for a long walk, and you'll get there eventually. Just sometimes you gotta let it come to you.
Yeah.
You can't, if you're burned out, you can't force it.
Do you find everybody? Do you kind of find that the ideas that they're just going to come to you in those weird moments, like when you're doing things and you end up writing something on your hand, or you know, you this. I mean, I've been at you know, my 7-year-old son's rugby practice where it's not really rugby, it's pulling tags off people. And I've been at the sideline, and one of the parents has been talking to me, and I've just gone, hold on one second. And I end up writing this bloody note to myself all over my hands and things. And it's just, I don't, is that something that everybody else kind of goes through?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I tend to, a lot of my self-published games tend to be stuff that, like, either literally I saw in a dream or somebody said something to me and I'm just like, oh boy. Or I had one of those moments where I'm reading a Stephen King novel and, like, I don't trust Stephen King's opinions on horror and I don't like his fans, but he does amazing character work and inner dialogues. And sometimes, like, just a turn of phrase in his novel will make me go, whoa, and then I'll want to go explore it. And or a lot of times I get really inspired by, like, side characters in things. Like, yeah, main characters are interesting, but a lot of times I want to explore the stories of side characters, and so I tend to write a lot of games based around that.
One thing I've noted, I mean, outside of writer's block, because all of us are GMs or have run games, I find having like a broad scope of things to draw from really helps with the improv while you're actually running the game. I mean, the number of scenes that I've just basically stolen and rewritten while, you know, GMing, I shall never admit to, but I mean, I thank media for being able to be a GM. So.
But when it comes to getting those ideas moving, then yeah, I do rely an awful lot on just stuff that comes out of absolutely nowhere and I jot down. But sometimes if I'm working through the ideas for a project before going to my first run through of it, I'll try certain things to just try to. The way I tend to think of it is it's like there's a seed crystal in my head, and I'm just sticking it in a saturated solution and waiting for stuff to stick to it. And there's there are certain techniques I'll use for that. I mean, yeah, like everyone else, I'll go out for walks and just something that'll get my head in another space. But the other thing I find very useful is meditation, or if you had the luxury of doing this, and I appreciate those of you with young children probably never get the chance to do this, but hypnagogic and hypnopompic states are absolutely fantastic for that. If you can capture the ideas you've got as you're falling asleep, or just lie in bed half asleep in the morning, pump the idea that you're stuck on in your head and just see what your dreaming mind does with it as you're drifting in and out of consciousness. You can get some fantastic stuff that way.
Oh, yeah.
What was that? Hypnagogic and...
Hypnopompic. Hypnopompic is when you're going to sleep, and hypnagogic is when you're waking up. It's that half awake state when you're between consciousness and unconsciousness.
That's my secret. I'm never fully awake.
But that actually brings me to a point that was also asked, which is we do draw from media. We do draw from inspirational material, and as Jason said, sometimes you don't want to credit that person for giving you the inspiration. Is there how do you define kind of the limit, or when you write scenarios that you're starting to go to that infringement or copyright issue where like your story becomes the other story? Because I have to admit, I've seen shows and I was like, especially one that I'm running actually tomorrow, For Whom the Bell Tolls, which is based on a show that I watched, and I was like, the show is okay, it's fun, but I had kind of a different twist to it. I like how the characters interact as side characters, especially as we discussed. But I do want to kind of explore how would players do this, and so that was kind of just out of the whim. I was like, I made a Vaesen scenario out of this. So it was a modern TV show, but I put it into like 1860s. And it turned out to be a very fantastic, creepy scenario with a few changes that I did to kind of just transport in time. But then, of course, it's not really my idea to the extent that I got the inspiration from somewhere else. So do you have any suggestions on how to handle this, because after all, if you look long enough, I think you will find references. Jacqueline, yeah.
Just remember that the Divine Comedy is Bible fan fiction. Like, your idea is going to have shown up somewhere else. Someone is going to have done it different, maybe even better. That's okay. What you are doing right now is trying to do the most interesting version of your idea for your audience. You're not trying to make the best platonic idea of this idea, or I guess the best platonic form of this idea, rather. You are trying to do the best version of this idea for your audience, for what you're trying to do. Again, the perfect is the enemy of both the good and the done. You want to make something fun, you want to make something spooky, do that. Don't try and be like, nobody has ever told this story before.
Yeah, there are no original ideas. There are original executions, original implementations, and that's what you're going for. And I think one of the great things about role-playing games is because they are dynamic things, that they are interactions between groups of players, that even if you start out with a very well-worn idea, by the time you get a whole bunch of different people running with it in different directions, it's going to turn into its own thing.
One of the distinctions though I do want to make when it comes to stealing from a movie or show or book that you love, if you're doing this just for your group, who cares? If I'm writing for my buddies, I could say like, Sidney Greenstreet from the Maltese Falcon walks out, and he is Sidney Greenstreet from the Maltese Falcon, straight out, and I don't have to even hide that I'm doing it. We can laugh and we can have fun. If I'm doing it for publication, that is where we start hitting a different thing. But I think for a lot of people who just want to be able to write a cool adventure or scene or character for their game, man, it's just between you and like the friends that you got that you're playing with. And who cares how much you're ripping off anything else? As long as you're making it fun, that's cool. Copyright don't matter. When we hit the realm of publishing and you're selling your work and all that, that's where you might want to kind of hide it a little bit better. But if it's just with your friends, do not ever concern yourself with that, unless you're just worried about your friends judging you of like, oh my god, you just totally stole that. As long as they had fun, who cares?
And the zeitgeist is real. I mean, a lot of the times you will be borrowing stuff without even knowing it. I am not joking. When I wrote the Atrocity exhibition, I did not know that there was a J.R. Ballard novel of the same name. So when somebody told me that, I was like, oh, well, shit.
There's also a very famous scene in the Metropolis book from second edition where in Bina's compound where a bunch of body parts fall on worshippers as a communion. So you're also pulling from within cult, but you're doing it in a different way, which is very cool.
So, I mean, there, as the others have said, there's really no original ideas in horror. We're just basically retelling the exact same stories because fear is universal, and these stories that go back since we were sitting around a fire, talking about the darkness beyond the firelight.
That was just last night.
Yeah. Campfire stuff.
So what you want to bring to it is your perspectives, your fears, your interactions, and the same with your players. Draw on their characters and their experiences, and that's how you make the story your own and you make it unique because you're approaching it from their perspective, not the perspective of a movie or a book. Because those have their own character and they have their own interactions within them. Make them your own and just draw on those shared narratives.
I think oh, sorry, Jacqueline, go on.
A piece of media that I think does this really well is the Magnus Archives, because they categorize things into like 14 or 15 different overarching fears, and they make each of those fears a semi-sentient entity that is inflicting itself upon the world. And I mention this because I'm currently sitting at the Gehenna Gaming table at PAX Unplugged, and they introduced me to Magnus Archives when I was looking for IPs to work with. And like so many of their stories are like seem original. A lot of them are very classic retellings of stories of why we're afraid of the dark, or why we're afraid of faceless crowds, or why we're afraid of the apocalypse, or whatever. And it's the way they tie it together is very original, but the stories themselves are very classic, very tropey, and that sort of familiarity with those stories mixed with a new and interesting way of presenting them, I think, is what made that particular audio drama so successful.
Yeah,
I think.
and oh, sorry, Gary.
Sorry, Scott. I was just going to say the simples that we've all kind of touched on, which is in terms of narrative and storytelling. You know, we all know the Greek mythic structure, and we all know those big kind of storytelling mechanics that are either taught or just naturally known because they are in the zeitgeist, as Jason's saying. You know, even story structures are in the zeitgeist. We've all seen enough and read enough to know these are, you know, this is them at home, this is the big calling, this is the magic weapon, this is the big bad guy, and we know those kind of movements and those things for people to use. But that is all just fair game, zeitgeist, storytelling, story arc, things that we love. And you know, Ditigris has put in the chat about, you know, Star Wars and the Hidden Fortress, Harry Potter. They use the same storytelling mechanics, but as Seth's saying, when it gets tricky is when we start looking at actual intellectual property and the, you know, characters, locations, real people that have existed. That's when it can become a tricky field. But in terms of that generalized storytelling methodology, that is absolutely fair game and can actually be really rewarding, especially, as Scott was saying earlier, when we kind of turn the tropes on their heads a bit and we offer something different. And I've written down what you said, Scott: no original ideas, just original executions. And that, I think, that is the way to take those massive storytelling kind of things and give it your fresh approach.
Also, since Newman brought it up, fuck a Harry Potter trans rights.
Yes, absolutely. But I mean, another thing that helps keep things looking fresher or feeling fresher when you play them is just simply doing things like changing time periods and changing locations. I mean, if you were to do your own version of the Thing but set it in Antarctica in the 1980s, it's going to feel like the Thing. But if you then, say, transpose it to, you know, an Egyptian archaeological dig in the 1890s or something like that, it's suddenly not going to feel an awful lot like the Thing anymore, even if you go for a lot of the same story beats.
I'm borrowing that right now.
Yeah, should we all write that
down? So we did have a couple of questions, which I think I can work in here, especially since we're talking from drawing from media and from different sources, which is we talk a lot about utilizing all 5 senses in writing and jamming. Would you say there's one above the others that you've evoked for horror more than others, that maybe comes from also inspirational material from books, from movies, or some sort of thing? I mean, what immediately comes to my mind is I think the recent movie The Silence, which kind of utilizes obviously the abandon or the not existence of noise to its extent, which I find quite interesting. And yeah, so any of your comments on that? Seth, yeah, go ahead.
Well, as I say, when it comes to senses, when writing, probably the most important is going to be smell, because it's linked to memory. It is extremely it really could pull people in. One that I have stolen from horror as one of my weird little notes that just has a strange phrase on it that would look crazy if somebody saw it, was from Silence of the Lambs. When reading that, is Clarice goes into the old storage thing where she finds the car, and it talked about the tang of mouse pee in the air. And wouldn't you know it, the next novel that I'm working on, I have somebody stepping into a very old building and stuff like that, and all of a sudden the tang of mouse pee is in there, because it is not something that I would have normally thought of that should be there. And just the smell of it starts putting in your head, how many mice are there? Where are they? It gives you a very distinct feeling from pulling from that smell. So as far as like, you can steal it from media, and it really does plant somebody there. Something so small. I might be the only person on earth that remembers that line was in that book, but it was enough to warrant me jotting that down on a note. As far as like, I like that detail.
It's my next scenario titled "Tang of Mouse Pee."
Look, there was at one point a note. That's all it said.
Yeah.
My wife would probably just kind of like.
Jacqueline, you had some comments earlier.
So I'm glad Seth brought up Hannibal, because I tend to not really like Hannibal XPs in a lot of media, but recently I've gotten really into like cannibal novels because of like how it's used as a metaphor for consumption and the disposability of humans in a capitalist society. And two of my favorites recently were Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Basarica and A Certain Hunger by Chelsea Summers. And both of them use taste a lot. And it's not just like the sort of cannibal, like the taste of human flesh, although that does play a central role. But the reason I like these two a lot is because they're describing the human flesh as part of a greater meal, which is a huge thing, because I think a lot of Hannibal XPs, the ones that don't really work for me, tend to be all about like, oh yes, they are cooking this fancy dish that I don't really know how it tastes, but they're using human meat in it, so it means they're both scary and cultured. But the way that Chelsea Summers describes, for example, duck confit, actually made me go out and buy a jar of duck fat and learn how to cook potatoes in duck fat, because I was starving reading this cannibal novel, and I'm like, this is a weird sensation to be having. But I think taste is actually a really fun and unexpected sense you can pull for horror novels, or horror works. And of course, touch. Something squishy where it's not supposed to be squishy. Something's cold where it's warm. Something spiky where you expect it to be soft. Always a fun thing to play with.
What was the second book, Jacqueline, you said then?
A Certain Hunger by Chelsea Summers.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I also rely an awful lot on smell when I'm describing stuff, because as I think I mentioned in yesterday's panel, I do like using disgust as a trigger in games, because it's a much easier thing to do in the game than try to scare someone. You're more guaranteed of a reaction. And smell is a great way of doing that, describing the olfactory experiences of horrific places is always terrific fun. But I mean, going back to what Jax was just saying about touch, I mean, the one thing I remember, not necessarily consciously lifting, but has certainly influenced the way I've described things a few times, was a throwaway reference in a Ramsey Campbell novel from the 1980s, one that he wrote under a pseudonym, a book called Claw. And there's a bit where someone is being mauled by, I can't even remember the details of it, but basically they had their eyelid chewed off, and it is swallowed. And I can't remember whether it's a bit from the book or something I extrapolated, but the feeling of the eyelashes tickling as you're swallowing that eyelid. And for some reason, that just really stuck in my mind. And it was such an incongruous, almost silly little thing that made the entire thing more disgusting and disturbing. And it's very much inspired how I describe things now. I'm always looking for those weird little details that will make things seem that bit more real and that bit more just wrong and fucked up.
I need to process the eyelids right now.
I'm just having a whole emotion over here.
I was wondering if Scott was going to go down the same route as Jacqueline, going, so I went out to the shop and I bought.
No, I go for home sourced eyelids. So yeah, I
No,
grow
I'm just
my
I'm
own.
just having a whole emotion over here. Don't mind me.
Yeah.
When it does come to stuff like the senses, there was, and actually I think it was a cult scenario I was recently reading. So maybe one of you wrote it. I don't know. Where the monster or the horror, what it came out was describing, it mentions it smelled like wet cardboard, which was so random. But
Mm.
that is a very distinct smell. If somebody says wet cardboard, you immediately go, I know exactly what that smells like. And that's one of the powers of that, because
Mm.
it is immediately familiar, but so out of place that it causes you to pause. And that is part of where the horror comes from, of like, that's not what I was expecting. So it doesn't have to be always foul, because foul, what the hell
Oh
does
yeah.
foul mean? But
Yeah.
wet cardboard, you immediately pin. I know exactly what that smells like, and there's no other smell like that. So,
Yeah.
and yeah, that's some scenarios I was recently mentioning. I think it was Delta Green that they mentioned that the monster smelled like wet cardboard. It was so weird that
There's
I can't even tell you what
yeah.
the
I mean,
scenario was,
there's
but I know that line.
yeah. Oh,
Yes.
there's a scenario that I wrote a while back where there's a monster in it that smells like wallpaper paste, and it's a similar kind of thing. That yeah, I mean, there's nothing disturbing about the smell of wallpaper paste, but it just shouldn't smell of it.
Yeah, I have to agree on uh, smell and taste being some of the most powerful senses to play upon because they're invasive. With
Mm.
touch and sight and hearing, they're exterior. If you're tasting it or you're smelling it, it's going inside you. And that creates an instant, physical reaction. I've been invaded by this thing. I can't get it out. What is it? What's it going to do to me? And I kind of picked that up because I used to be a crime journalist. And trust me, when you're standing in human blood, you remember the smells and the taste in the air. So,
Some games I think that do that sort of invasive feeling of senses do that really well. Delta Green, which I started playing recently, super fun. Bluebeard's Bride, again, my very favorite. Um, yeah, cult tends to do it in certain scenarios. I think it really depends on the scenario and the power that's being invoked, but a lot of times that happens. Yeah, no, like taste. I like what you said about taste and smell being invasive because that feels like something that we
Mm.
should be able to choose, and we're not always able to choose, and that feels very, very uncomfortable when we can't.
and try to weave the different senses into the same description. I mean, you don't have to just say it smells like this, it looks like this. I mean,
Hmm.
try to create images that invoke all the senses. I remember a kid's book of all things that a person's face was a boiling pit of maggots. You're not just seeing that, you're smelling it, you're tasting it, you're experiencing it.
Now you can
So,
hear them squishing. Yeah.
and you can hear them squish. Yeah.
Did you
The
read
one where
German
Dr.
folk
Zeus
tale,
went a bit
maybe?
off.
I don't remember what it was, but yeah, 10-year-old me was like, what am I reading? And why was that in the kids' library?
I do remember reading, and I think for someone who's not initially of the scientific mind, but very much interested in it, and you saying all this and these amazing examples that you've given, it is with smell, and you're just going to go, yeah, of course it is. But I just remember reading this and going, okay, that's next level. As soon as you've said about invasive senses, with smell, the reason we're smelling it is because they're literal physical particles from the object in the air which we are inhaling. It's not just a cartoon scent which is coming off the object that we're smelling. It's literal physical particles that we're smelling. So by the time we're smelling it, that phrase, Jason, the invasive senses, it so is, because I think in any of the wider genre kind of products that we're looking at here, that is such a horrific thing, and such a as a player, if someone if that's explained to you, it's terrifying, isn't it? Which is brilliant.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm still thinking about the eyelids, Scott. I'm sorry, but it's just like in the back of my mind, they're still flapping as I'm thinking to phrase
And
this
tickly.
question.
Wait, just think of it like a very tickly oyster.
Stop it. My partner was trying to help me put on false eyelashes after brunch, which involved oysters, and I don't.
Well, maybe we change the idea then from eyelids to another question that came from the audience, which was since media and inspiration. Now, if there would be the possibility that you could collaborate with any horror creator or artist that we might know of or don't really know, but who would that one artist be to kind of help you alleviate, to increase your story, or maybe create it into a movie or something like that? Is there any kind of person or persons unknown, Jacqueline?
I have two, and they're both following me on Twitter, and they still haven't asked about collaboration yet, and I'm very sad. The first one is Rusty Quill, obviously. I really want to do either a tabletop or a LARP about the Magnus Archives. I have several ideas for that. My current big Magnus Archives idea is a Lucas family reunion LARP, which is like the Addams family, but worse. And the other one is Ruth Anna Emrys, who wrote the Tides of Inheritance trilogy, which is looking at the Lovecraft mythos through the eyes of the Deep Ones as your protagonists. And like the whole raid on Innsmouth actually essentially being an immigration raid. And like the first story, which you can get for free on tour, The Litany of Earth, I'm going to let Newman write that down.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You can get that for free on tour.com. It is a novella. And the main character, who is a queer deep one, is currently starts the story living in San Francisco after World War II with a Japanese family who were interned at Manazar. So there's an explicit connection to two things Lovecraft hated. And also, like... but it's also using the Deep Ones to like talk about like what we consider outsiders and immigration issues and like the very sort of in-group out-group thing of American society. And it's also horrific in its own right, but it's also incredibly beautiful. And I really love horror that explores its subjects with an amount of compassion. So I would love to work with Luciana Emrys.
Yeah, I was really deeply depressed when I read The Litany of Earth because I'd spent 10 years writing convention scenarios with the same basic premise and linking them all together as the sort of deep one diaspora after the raid on Innsmouth through the course of the 20th century in America from the point of view of the Deep Ones. And I realised now that I can never really publish that because it's just going to look like I'm ripping her off.
I totally admit I absolutely was liberally borrowing some of her ideas from Wintertide when I did A Mother's Love, which is set in Innsmouth, because it's about the humanizing the Deep Ones. So yeah, I fully admit there's some media that I ripped off and published. So
you got away
and I
with
sent
it.
an homage email. So.
I mean, I think it's totally fine if you include her in the mediography.
Well, all I did was add more of a human edge to them because I had read that and I thought it was just such a wonderful take. But it is part of the different perspectives that you get from the different media is very good to use as your inspirations. And so there's one right there.
Scott, Newman, Jason.
I can recently say that I actually got to collaborate with one of the people I've been wanting to collaborate with, which is Simon Paul Wilson, who wrote Ghost City Girl, and in his short story collection, The Nothing Tree, which is quite possibly the only short story in recent memory that has scared the living shit out of me. I mean, and when I say that, I'm not joking. I just threw that book across the room. And we're working together on Cult now. So, but if I had a big wish list, it would be Guillermo del Toro, because he is the only director, writer, producer genius that can actually pull off the show the monster and make it work. And I just love his passion.
I think there were a couple of questions that might circle back on especially that point. But Newman first.
I think in different mediums, a few different things. I'm very lucky with our long form Regency Cthulhu actual play that we're doing, which is turning into a fantastic creature, an absolute labor of love. Definitely a labor, but a labor of love. And I'm writing the campaign, obviously pre-shows, but then also tailoring it. And my intention is to have it as a campaign when we're done. And Lynn Hardy is someone I've been in touch with a number of times now, and I think she's an amazing human being. She's one of the amazing editors, Dr. Lynn Hardy at Chaosium, and she does line editing. She does amazing writing, and she does so many things I couldn't even list them. I would love one day to convince Lynn to look at that work and either tell me to go away or give me some pointers. Would be amazing. But I tell you, if I was thinking with Jason's mindset in terms of like, wow, what if you'd written something and there was like, the film medium that you were looking at to take your narrative and do something filmic with it, I have to say I was absolutely blown away by, although I made my dad watch it and I'm not sure he was as blown away as I was blown away with David Lowery's A24, The Green Knight. Just the visuals and the storytelling, the thematic kind of pulls on it that, being a fan of Paladin, and it just was, I felt very, I think I was going through something in my own personal life at the time, but I just felt very emotionally open to it. And I guess aspirational. If I could ever do anything that had that impact on another human being, I would be a very proud human.
I don't think I breathed through that entire movie. It was just,
it
was a visual spectacle.
Yeah, I think if we're going for aspirational things like that, and particularly film, the person I'd choose would be Peter Strickland, who's a British film director and writer who's made some of the strangest borderline horror films of the last 10 years. He did Barbarian Sound Studio, which is this amazing film about film dubbing in Italian horror in the 1970s that just goes into madness and surrealism. He did a film called In Fabric, which is about a haunted dress that again becomes just a masterclass in this blend of black comedy and surrealism and just a multitude of what the fuck moments. And yeah, I mean his films are just glorious for that. And I just find that whole blending of elements, that use of, it's the way he uses comedy to disturb. There are moments of black comedy, particularly in Fabric, where you've got characters who in another film might be comic relief and are saying very funny things, but the context of them and the way it's presented just makes it feel wrong and creepy.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's the kind of thing I aspire to. And if I could work with someone like that and learn from him, I'd be a happy man.
Wonderful. Yeah, I did want to go back because I think it was, at least for me, one of the most refreshing and recent cinematography media events, which was Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities, which came out on Netflix a couple of months ago, I think. But I did use it for inspiration, but also I liked how Del Toro kind of put together this ensemble of different horror writers that each had their individual style, and you could see it throughout his show. But each story in itself was containing kind of the essence that I feel like Del Toro's movie does. And I think one of the circling back to the beginning, which was the what Newman, you said about the CGI effect. We are very prone now to spot these minute details. Oh, like obviously that monster is now CGI, but it was made in a way that I feel like one of the stories, which Lot 19 or Lot something, one of the first ones, where it was about this special lot that was sold off to the next one. And you don't really see, in a sense, the monster until the very end, and only then it's kind of kept in this dark mysteriousness in the background until it really, ends. Not saying too much, but I find this, the aspect and his compilation, how he achieved his kind of curiosity show here was very mind-opening for me, especially since you brought up Pigment's model, Dreams in a Witch House, and I would say, like, especially Pigment's model, I found, since I ran also the from the House of Rillier, The Art of Madness, several times in the days, and I really like that scenario, which is kind of the continuation of Pigment's model, and I felt like almost like vindicated, because it kind of transported it into the modern day. And it was very beautiful, at least for me. And I'd love to pick his brain on kind of how he approaches his stories, in a sense. So, on that front with Jason, when it comes to that point. And we just got a new question, or probably earlier, but I only see it now. Which would be what are your favorite horror subgenres to be inspired by, write or play, as in something that never fails to get your creative flowing. For the questionnaire here, it's easily horror that focuses on the weird and creepy moments, dreamy stuff, magical realism. A good reference for that should be Asian horror in general. From Gabe, in this sense. Do you have some subgenres that kind of maybe inspire your writing, your play specifically, or is it more generally, as we kind of started in the beginning, the cacophony of everything that we devoured over the years? Jacqueline, please.
I love systemic horror and dystopia specifically. I get the appeal of horror where you can defeat whatever is coming after you, but probably because of my anarchist leanings, my favorite is, no, this is a system under which you have to survive and find even some way to, like, protect yourself and find moments of joy. That is probably my favorite. There are also pieces of Reddit creepypasta that never fail to inspire me. The Left-Right Game by Neon Tempo being probably the best. But also the Search and Rescue stories, the Infected Town trilogy. There's a lot of really, really good apotheosis horror, really. Apotheosis or transcendental horror, the idea that, like, at the end of this, you are going to be something greater than yourself. I always find that weirdly comforting too. It's probably because, like, I grew up Catholic. There's probably a little bit of that in there. But like horror where you turn into a deific monster is one of my favorites. So yeah.
Seth, any input here? Any subgenres?
I can
Newman?
jump in there. Systemic horror, I mean, it's relevant to all of us, isn't it? As we're, the systems that we live in and we look at and we reflect on, and especially, let's be honest, the last half of a decade is fantastic writing material. Not so great for humanity, but great for creators who want to look at, potentially, let's say, a dystopian future or systemic horror. But for me, those things hugely, like Jacqueline, I love the those religious connotations, those things beyond your character, whether it be for good, for evil, whether it's cult, whether it's vampire, werewolf, you know, those things. I just love exploration of those things of your character. But I think the absolute core of it all, for me, and I think this is probably, I'm sure someone's going to tell me it's not in a minute, but I think at the core of all of this is that mystery element. Is that I am looking for something, whether it's within my character, whether it's a literal clue I'm looking to solve something, or whether it's something that the character's not aware of. They just know that there is something out there to engage in. And I think if I find that in media or you know, whatever media that be, that really catches me on, because I love solving, and I think that's very much what I want to see in film, TV, you know, gaming. That's the core of what it is for me.
For me, there are two almost opposed types of horror that really speak to me, and a lot of the stuff that I do, I think, is an attempt to synthesize them. One is, I don't even know how to describe the subgenre, but horror that relies on dream or nightmare logic, that defies rational explanation, where the disturbing aspect of it is the fact that the pieces feel like they should fit together but don't quite. And for me, the master of that was always Robert Aikman. I'm a huge Aikman fan, and his stories are the closest I've ever got to feeling like I'm dreaming while being awake. And to some extent, Jonathan Carroll does the same thing in his novels, in a slightly different way. I mean, his work is perhaps slightly gentler. No, I wouldn't say gentler, but more poetic. But on the other end of the scale, when it comes to film in particular, my formative experiences were in the early 80s, and I just love body horror. I love stuff that is about the violation of the human form and what it means to be human, the stuff that taps into our fears of disease and aging and infirmity. That speaks to me on a very visceral, fundamental level. And if I'm looking for stuff that's going to disturb me, that I can put into my games, that's where it comes from. So, yeah, I guess I'm always looking for that point where the weird and ineffable meets the disturbingly visceral.
Yeah, and it's not obvious that some of these made it into your scenarios that you wrote in the past. But yes, Seth or Jason?
So because I was thinking about the question as like what is like my guilty pleasure that I always just love coming back to, that I always get a lot from, and it is I actually just tried to look up the term for it, but it's more of the urban cult, which I absolutely hate the fact that one name is associated with two of them, but there is Rosemary's Baby and The Ninth Gate are spectacular examples.
Amazing.
Very recently would be Archive 81, where we have this apartment building with this cultish aspect to it that's going on, and those always, like, I'm an absolute sucker for them. They really do get a lot of ideas flowing, and there is a term for it, but it's more of just the urban cult that is going on in a completely modern day society, where we have this very old style secret weirdness going on versus having it be out in the country or in some other time period. It's just in the apartment down the street. And
I think Ira Glass referred to that as yuppie horror.
Yuppie horror.
I might be wrong.
Yuppie horror.
oh, okay. Well, you mentioned Glass. Like, another good example would be Candyman, which had a beautiful song by
Yes.
Yes.
So, but it is that for some reason that really does. It always gets me, is the idea of more of the apartment complex horror. So,
Yeah, I have a something of a love-hate relationship with Rosemary's Baby because I was born around the time that was written and my mother's name was Rosemary. So anyway, moving on.
Uh, I guess my genre of would be psychological horror or modern cosmic horror. Is basically I like character stories more than the external monster that's trying to hunt you down. For example, a Relic is one that I just watched recently, and it's kind of a metaphor for losing one's mind and dementia, where the person's actually not only is their body not their own, their thoughts are quite literally warping the house, making it smaller or larger, and affecting everybody around them. So yeah, and recently liminal horror is really started to get under my skin. That uncanny feeling that you're looking at something that should be human or should be normal, but you always sense that it's not, that there's something behind the wallpaper, something behind the paint, something that's there that you can't see. So that might explain why I write cult.
David, can I ask a quick follow-on question, just a small one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Does anybody have a genre that is not horror related that they like because they watch it and then go, wouldn't this be amazing as horror?
That is literally me in the TV show Criminal Minds. I love watching it as a supernatural horror because of all of the weird fucking psychic and afterlife shit they keep putting in it. And, like, it's a terrible crime show. It is a phenomenal cosmic supernatural horror detective show.
I think my wife would
anything by David, anything by David Lynch, because that man might say that he's not writing horror, but my God, he can.
I will fight a man over Laura Palmer. I'm sorry, I am Laura Palmer's lawyer. Laura Palmer did nothing wrong.
I mean, one of the greatest jump scares was done by David Lynch in my mind in Mulholland Drive. That whole build-up.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, just if you want to know how to do a jump scare, just watch that scene.
Yeah.
And it's just in daylight too. So.
For me, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, kind of jumping on Jax's thing of like really bad detective crime shows. Same thing. They're guilty pleasure. They're awful, and I'll watch 19 seasons of it. But before the writers' strike happened, they ended up killing a really cool plot thread. It came back with something completely different. Bones. There was a storyline in Bones where there was this silver skeleton. Once again, an urban cult, because that's my thing. And I was absolutely riveted. And then they just kind of dropped it. They're like, oh, it was Billy the whole time, and let's move on. But that was one where it's like, oh, I got so many ideas flowing because this is so cool. If we were just to go ahead and have the supernatural and all this stuff going on, because a lot of them, they do have the weird mysteries. And you're like, oh, it was probably the husband, but wouldn't it be cool if it was actually their ancestor that came back from that old book they were reading, and they're harvesting organs. Yeah, and you can get the creativity. It's not technically horror, but it really makes me think of horror.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one I was going to mention as a genre is black comedy. And this sort of ties in with what I was saying about Peter Struckton before. But I don't think it's a coincidence that an awful lot of people who make comedy media also end up making horror. Because the two genres, I think, are very much kissing cousins. They use a lot of the same techniques. They're about building up and releasing tension. And a good scare is a lot like a good joke. And I mean, the specific example I keep going back to is a British TV series from the 90s called Jam, that was based on a radio series called Blue Jam, that was written by Chris Morris, who might be better known for his film Four Lions. But he did this sketch show, I guess you could call it, and got a few other writers on board. And it is the darkest fucking shit you would ever see. It is the stuff of nightmares, but it's done as comedy sketches. There's one sketch in particular which I just keep going back to as the most horrific thing I've ever seen on TV, where you have this woman who's called a plumber into her house. And it transpires pretty quickly that she's called him there because she wants him to fix her baby, because the baby's stopped moving and stopped breathing, and she just figures, oh, it's all pipes and stuff like that. A plumber will be able to figure it all out. And he's horrified, doesn't want anything to do with it, and she just keeps offering him more and more money. And it just ends up with him running pipes out from the radiator through the body of this baby, so it just sort of gurgles every now and then.
Okay, I'm glad I asked this question, because I'm not going to sleep for a week.
And this is a comedy program, but dear God, you could probably find that sketch on YouTube, and I mean,
Oh my God.
there are any number of other sketches in there that are just as disturbing.
Well, I mean, just Monty Python, the tenement flats where the architect actually designs a slaughterhouse. So, basically, as he's describing, the design, the person that's going to hire him realizes, why are there spinning blades? Why are there blood gutters? So, comedy is a great place to steal horror ideas from.
Yeah, because fundamentally they're both about transgression, about
Yes.
transgressing norms.
If I might add, actually, since currently I'm divided into writing actually suburban cult ideas, but also since I'm very active in Vaesen and Gothic horror at the moment, and we just moved, so I kind of rearranged our library that I had from my childhood, and my parents then also settled. And so now I have all my childhood books back, which include the classical and even my father's version of the Grimm's Tales, the uncut, unabridged versions.
Oh, God.
And I've just started to reread a couple of those, and I have to say they gave me multiple story ideas, especially for Vaesen or Gothic horror that is just unbelievably brutal, where most of the time, you shouldn't do that. If you do, I will dismember and kill you and eat you, and then you will be sorry for it. Okay. It is very I was just reading up on that. It's called, I think, Black Parenting, or the time period was described as Black Parenting in German traditional history as these stories were told so vivid, so vile, so brutal, as used as a deterrent for kids not to become unruling and obey their rules. But they are so dark and so disturbing, and especially like the older German versions. I actually found a book from 1928 or something from my neighbor, which is even in old German font, which takes a while to read, but holy shoot, I could just use that as a script and just describe what is written there, and I have a scenario going. It is fantastic. It is really horrifying.
Yeah.
I mean, Disney skipped in Cinderella with the stepsisters cutting off their own heels to fit into the shoe. So,
but I wonder if that's just a very German thing, because the other really nightmarish children's tales, or set of children's tales along those lines I can remember, was Shock-Headed Peter, which I mean is I think a bit more recent than that, but is just it's not just horrifying, and it doesn't just involve horrible things happening with scissors and stuff like that, but it's just weird as well, like really creepily weird.
Oh yeah, if you grow out your nails too much, I will cut off your fingers because you never cut them.
Yes.
Or if you, I actually have my children's book over there, which is illustrated from I think 1819 copper plates, So
Oh wow.
it's really really an interesting thing, and it kind of just reminded me like yeah, drawing inspiration from media is sometimes within your bookshelf, but it's from past beyond.
Mm.
Hmm.
Which I think brings me to the final question, since unfortunately we have to wrap this up already, which is a simple question. What is a book that you're currently reading and you would suggest for everyone to get some inspiration from, or book, or media, or TV show, or anything art related that you would say that brings great inspiration, or that is a good thing to work with at the moment? Well, if nobody starts, I can just quickly continue on my folklore story. I'm currently reading A History of Magic, Witchcraft, and the Occult by Susanna Lipscomb, which is more like an illustrated companion or compilation of different eras of witchcraft throughout Europe and the world. And for most of it, it's just the imagery is so great, and wood carvings and everything from medieval times, Sumerian, up to modern day witchcraft, Salem. And it's more like a coffee table book, but I feel like it's a very interesting book for all kinds of horror and yeah, the occult in that aspect. So that was my aspect here, my point, my recommendation. And I hear that some people read the exact same book. So
Gabe's reading the same book. I can tell you nothing as fanciful or most likely as the rest of you. I've actually just finished reading. Do you remember Vampire the Masquerade brought out some novels? There was a whole series of novels, so I've been working my way through some of those, which I've been really enjoying. But I tend to never read a series in actually the series. I tend to read one, read something else, then go back to it. I like to kind of have a little bit of a gap in between. But I've just finished reading. I have to say, I've really, really enjoyed it. I think it was yogsogoth.net who published the Express Diaries, which essentially is someone's Horror on the Orient Express campaign, professionally actual plays and stuff. But they've written it as this fantastic series of diaries from character point of views, and I have to say it's quite wonderful. It really is. It really, really is. I almost felt like I was at the table with a bunch of players, but without the dice rolls and the inappropriate jokes. It was fantastic. It was a really, really good read. So I think it was Nick Marsh who wrote it. I don't have the book to hand. Yeah, so really, really impressed.
The recommendation I'd make, I've just recently started reading Moth Woman by Nicole Cushing, and I'm not far enough into it yet to really talk about that, but just her general body of work. Cushing is a weird writer to pin down. Her stuff is somewhere between the existential horror of Thomas Ligotti and the more visceral stuff of Clive Barker. It mashes them up very nicely. And her work has grown steadily more absurd and bizarre, sort of drifting away from classical horror and into just sheer weirdness as it's gone on. And her last novel, A Sick Grey Laugh, is one of the strangest books I've ever read and was utterly compelling all the way through. And in terms of role-playing inspiration, I found it fantastically inspirational, just for the way it creates fake histories and puts all these absurd elements into them, and then how these then shape the present day and the very broken people in them. And it's just a lot of the stuff that I look for in gaming, even if it's not even remotely gaming related.
Jason, Seth, Jacqueline?
Say the one that I guess the most recent horror novel that I finished is Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman, which is set during, I guess, the 13th or 14th century plague in France, and it's a religious horror. But with my favorite by Buehlman by far, and the one I would always recommend to anyone, is The Restless Dead, which is a 1970s set vampire story in New York. It is absolutely wonderful, and if you are an audiobook fan, he is the only case of the author reads the book that is actually worth it, because he's a professional actor. So it's wonderful. I would actually really recommend that because it is a really cool twist on the children vampires trope, and the setting and everything is just spectacular. But I really do recommend Beelman. I really like his stuff.
Wonderful.
The most recent one that I'm constantly reading books of all kinds just for inspiration, but Goth by Atazuki, I believe. Basically, a collection of short stories about these two Japanese high school students that are completely fascinated with serial killers. And each short story is how they brush against these serial killers and what they do. And some of the writing is just exquisite, but horrific. So, and they also go into, they switch perspectives between the actual students and the killers themselves. So I would definitely suggest that one. And then I'm always rereading the Books of Blood by Clive Barker. I kind of make it my religion.
Okay. And Jax, any recommendation from your side?
I've recommended so many books and stuff throughout this channel, but I'm gonna recommend you my first ever, I guess, horrific low fantasy book with elements of horror, which I read at the age of 8, which is one of my formative novels, was The Tombs of Atuan by Ursula K. Le Guin. And it is a Bildungsroman with a priestess of nameless powers and a very real labyrinth under the earth. And it's very, very good.
Wonderful.
Pretty short. You can read it in an afternoon. It is a fantasy classic. I strongly recommend it.
Wonderful. Well, then, with that, I think the tables are filling up again, and some of us are GMing games now. So I want to thank everyone here on the table and guests here to be with us for this beautiful session and discussion about horror films and horror and media inspiration for running games. Thank you very much, all of you guests, all of you listeners, and looking forward to the last couple of days of the convention and for a couple more discussions in the realm of cult that are coming up, and as well with Peter Nallo going a bit more deeper, and Matthew Sanderson and Jax. We're going to discuss a lot of different things tomorrow as well. So stay tuned, and thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You.